This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State range scientist in Hays, Keith Harmoney, kicks off the show as he highlights work he has done that provides a decision tree for cattle producers to help make turnout cattle choices. The show continues with K-State's Jenny Ifft, Cornell University's Wendong Zhang, and The Ohio State University's Seungki Lee as they explain how their background has impacted their work in extension. Micah Brouk, K-State dairy specialist, ends the show discussing recently approved funding for a new K-State dairy teaching and research facility, which will include modern, cutting-edge technology for teaching, research, and extension. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show discussing grass turnout for cattle with K-State range scientist at Hays, Keith Harmoney. Keith, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, howdy there, Shelby. Thanks for having me on.
And Keith, today with you taking a focus more towards the grass aspect of this, and what is the current state of grass in western Kansas?
Well, we're pretty dry and parched at the moment. Right here at Hays, we've only had 1/10 of an inch since the 1st of March, so our conditions out here are really dry at the moment.
Is that seeing then a lack of leaf material on top for grass?
Well, we're just now getting into the start of the growing season. We've been having unseasonably warm temperatures, and so the growing season has started a little bit earlier. So, the moisture that we usually get in March and April really is what sets us up for growth later in the year. But that winter precip that we get, say October through March, that is stored up in the soil, that's what really gets us started. That's the moisture that we have in the ground when temperatures start to warm up to get things kicked off well. And we did have some decent moisture earlier in the dormant season, but we've been so dry that recently that a lot of that moisture is pretty much used up now. It's gone. So we're really dry. We're seeing green up, but there's not a lot of growth out there.
And do you think that will have an impact for how many cattle producers should be putting out this year?
Yeah, the dormant season precip that we receive is what sets us up for getting good initial green up and the start of growth. But it's really the moisture, the rainfall that we get in April, May, and June that really is the main determinant of how much yield we're going to have at the end of the season. And we're starting off so dry right now that it's lowering the probabilities that we're going to have the amount of rainfall that we need to reach what our average production would be, and that's usually what we're setting our stocking rates on. And so if we're not going to meet that expectation with our spring or early growing season rainfall, then we probably will be overstocked by the end of the year. We're starting off dry, but the moisture that we can still get through May and June will determine a lot of what our yield is going to be by the end of the season.
And Keith, you were recently a part of a publication titled Grass Turnout Decisions in Western Kansas. And within this publication, for helping make decisions on what pastures are looking like, stocking rates, you have this decision tree. And it starts off with unstressed and stressed. So can you walk us a little bit through factors producers would consider when looking at how many cattle and what their pastures are looking like?
Yeah, the decision tree that's in that publication, it's basically a tool to help make decisions, to help make sometimes some tough decisions. And it starts off by making an assessment of what condition your pastures were in the prior year. And so that initial assessment is needed just so you know what your starting potential might be coming out of that winter time period. Things that could factor into that would be, did your grass experience drought the year before? Maybe you had an exceptionally high load of grasshoppers in a pasture, and so it was defoliating, taking more leaf material off than what maybe was planned for. Maybe you had to graze a pasture a little more than what you had planned, and so you removed more leaf material off of that pasture the prior year. So anyway, not having that leaf material there, or being stressed from drought, or even going into dormancy because of a drought, so that it's not, those grasses aren't photosynthesizing the whole season. All those things are going to lower the carbohydrate status and the vigor of those plants going into the winter and coming out of the winter. That's the first thing that needs to be assessed. If, you know, our pastures in this area, we actually experienced a pretty decent growing season last year. Most of the pastures that I can think of that, at least for our research center, they would have entered the dormant season, what I would call an unstressed condition, because we had the growth that we needed for the stocking rates that we had out there. And that's the best case scenario that we have every year, is that we're meeting the amount of forage growth each year for the, or the number of animals that were put out on pasture. And so if your pastures weren't in stress going into the dormant season, then they're going to have that potential to be vigorous and start off strong this spring. And so that's the first thing that is assessed in this decision tree.
And what's the next step looking at, once again, precipitation we would have recently seen?
The next part of that is, if after determining whether they're stressed or not stressed going into the dormant season, the next thing is to look at how much precipitation you received during the dormant season and how much soil moisture you have at the end of the dormant season. So those plants, when the temperatures get warm and they're ready to start growing, the day lengths are increasing, soil temperatures are warming, they're ready to grow. The next thing is whether or not they have the moisture to grow. And so that dormant season precipitation is the next key thing. Is it dry coming out of the dormant season? Do they lack that moisture to start growing well right away? Or is there plenty of soil moisture so that they can start growth right away? And right now out here in western Kansas, we're in that scenario where we're lacking that soil moisture here to start the early growing season.
What's the next step in this decision tree?
Well, the next step would be to look to see how much precipitation we receive in April, May, and June. We have collected or kept track of our pasture production and link that with our precipitation that we've received out here at our research center at Hayes over the past 50 years. And so we've been able to correlate our rainfall with our end of year pasture yield. And there's a very good correlation or relationship with our early spring rainfall with what our end of year pasture yields are. And so looking at that early growing season precipitation in April, May, and June, there's a really good direct relationship with how much how much yield we have at the end of the year. And the best relationship we have is if we're actually lacking rainfall in that spring season. If we lack rainfall in that April, May, June time period, we can pretty much predict that we're going to be lacking yield at the end of the year. So whatever percentage decline there is in average precipitation in that April, May, June time period, that's approximately the percentage deficit that you'll have in pasture yield at the end of the season.
Do you also see a relationship between the amount of leaf material that is consumed off plants to how large their root systems are?
What you're talking about there kind of goes into the concept of take half and leave half when we're first establishing stocking rates and we're trying to balance the amount of forage produced with the amount of forage demand from the grazing animals that we have out there. We're usually trying to strike a balance where half the leaf material or half the vegetation that's produced during the year is consumed by the animals, or it's trampled by the animals as they graze. It's used by wildlife. Maybe it'll weather and it'll break off the plant and fall to the ground as leaf litter. But half of that vegetation is lost, and the other half then is retained as live, standing, living vegetation. And we need that because we need that leaf material there to keep photosynthesizing and producing carbohydrates and supplying that plant with energy. And when there's an imbalance, when we remove more leaf material than what we would typically like to reach that take half, leaf half, our root systems suffer. So we can take off half the leaf material and not see any reduction in root growth below ground. But if we remove more than 50% of that leaf material, then we'll start to see roots stop growing. And actually, when we remove 70% of the leaf material from the plant, we'll have well over half the roots stop growing for a period of time. That root growth is important because that's what's uptaking nutrients, it's what's uptaking water. So the larger the root system we have, the better we're able to see those plants to capture moisture and capture nutrients and use it for above ground growth. If we have small root systems, that's a smaller volume of soil that those plants are able to explore and to extract moisture from.
If people want to learn more about this or hear more about this, what learning opportunity do they have tomorrow?
We have a webinar, a grass turnout webinar that's going to take place at noon. Myself and Chip Redmond. Chip is the meteorologist for K-State, and he's going to be on there talking about the weather outlook. And I'm going to be on there talking about basically this decision tree and looking at grass turnout.
And this webinar is free. However, you do need to get registered. And where can they go to find those details?
Yeah, if you just log on to ksubeef.org. And also, when the webinar is finished, they'll be able to access that site, and they could replay the webinar anytime they'd like.
That was K-State range scientist at Hayes, Keith Harmoney. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will put a link to get registered for this webinar. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing extension and a trend we're seeing in extension with K-State's Jenny Ifft, Cornell University's Wendong Zhang, and The Ohio State University's Seungki Lee. As we start this conversation, you will first be hearing from Kansas State University's Jenny Ifft.
When I work on extension, my responsibilities, a lot of times I'm having to explain crop insurance concepts or farm bill concepts. And it feels like translation. It is really hard work taking these complex, complicated products and putting them into words that people can understand. I think one time, and this was before AI, I spent a good hour on how to express physically unavailable to plant for crop insurance. If you're talking to someone, you say it's just too wet to get in the field, but that's harder to write that down. But I wonder how you guys have navigated this, because you're from other countries where different languages are spoken, where you didn't grow up in this context. So you kind of have multiple layers of translation. What has that been like? And you've both had very successful extension programs.
So I'm originally from China. So I'm not an Iowa farm boy, although I think that, the initial reaction of any search committee would be that they want to find someone who grew up on an Iowa farm or a Nebraska farm, Kansas farm. And Seungki is from South Korea. And if we look at all the PhD students in Ag Econ department, almost 3/4 or at least more than half are international graduate students. This is in part a necessity. It feels a little scary, especially for me early on, that I didn't know what I'm stepping into, but it's turned out to be a really rewarding experience. And I feel that the trade, for example, become an area, an example where the international background can be a good thing. That my ability to be able to speak Chinese and English made me more believable when presenting the impacts of U.S.-China trade war, and also to talk about the retaliation strategies and the thinking of why China wants to target certain U.S. sectors during these talks. I do think that you will face questions some of the audience members may think they may not be able to understand you, or they may have some tests that they want to to make sure that you know what you're talking about. For example, I don't want to touch the very complicated crop insurance target topics. Jenny can handle that. I picked much easier topics, land values. So I think that my experience is that it does takes a personality, a willingness to help others, regardless which language you speak. But the international background, especially the increasingly diverse demand, created opportunities that you not only want to hear about crop insurance, that people also want to hear about solar, agrivoltaic, and or infrastructure or urban erosion of farmland, which actually happened in Europe, in Asia, in many other countries, or international experiences sometimes may not necessarily be a hurdle and can be an asset as well. I'll see what Seungki has to say.
I absolutely agree with Wendong. I think, first of all, I actually tried myself like best to be deeply rooted and like understanding like well what the US like agriculture like looks like and like how it is operating, regardless of you are like from the US or not. And of course, like as Wendong mentioned, I'm from like originally from South Korea, and I have actually some of the farm background. My parents are still running an apple orchard, but it is relatively small. So that helped me to relate myself to small sized farms. Like a lot of them are, I know like how they are operating, how squeezed their margin is. So that actually helped me to relate myself to and have a very quick discussion with many small farms. And also like my background studying in Iowa really helped to understand like how the large scale like industrialized US agriculture will look like and how like more than 1,000 acre size farms are operating in general. So I think that kind of two different size farm like backgrounds is really helping me to actually understand better. And also like I tried hard to how the technology and like market operation is like working in the US agriculture. And that's I think eventually like made myself like as kind of market-based extension program or extension economist. So might be actually even easier than Wendong's land value or like Jenny's policies because mine is a little more just supply demand kind of discussion. As Wendong mentioned, I also tried hard to bring what I can like make some additional value added by using and leveraging my international background. So South Korea is also like very major trade partner, especially in ag with US and also many other countries. So I sometimes look at how country is treating like this international trade flows to make the food system more resilient and how to diversify the importing sources to make the food system more like resilient and sustainable. So I think that's quite relevant to especially these days when like US is thinking of like maybe strategically putting places like tariffs and also like making like maybe some of the diversification like strategies in mind. So then like I can actually like bring some of the South Korea cases or maybe even Japan cases as well. And also like maybe this might be relevant to my personal backgrounds, but my family is also nowadays thinking like my parents are getting old and thinking of like how to like when they're retiring, how to treat this farmland and whether these apple trees and orchards should be gone or like should be sold. So this farm succession issue is actually pretty important and getting more and more significant in South Korea. And actually, I heard US agriculture, especially in Midwest, I see a lot of like family farms are also having a similar issues. So farm succession is actually part of my actually these days extension interest. So I want to actually dig into that a little more. And certainly I see there will be some synergy that I can bring from my personal backgrounds and personal experience with like, and that could be shared with my clientels in Ohio. So that's probably how I would shape myself like and fit myself into the extension needs. And also like the most important thing is the goodwill should be the starting point that like try to help people and try to make some like give some practical help that farmers can use. So I think that willingness is actually the primary source of energy that like makes good extension program at the end.
With your global view of agriculture then and just overall looking around the world, thinking about extension, education is really important. And so as you do look around, do you see learning opportunities that maybe countries or just within even our own country that we're missing or wishing we could share with one another?
Personally, I think extension and land grant university system is one of the shining feature of the US system. China and many other countries doesn't have this. What they have are the elite universities, and the universities even focused on agriculture typically are housed in big cities. So in the sense that the extension system pushed a lot of us employed by the university to really think about these locally specific, state-specific problems that people who work at New York will have a lot of people will think about issues in vineyards, in dairy, in apples, while if you are in Kansas, you think about the wheat and cattle. So I think this give you a lot of local expertise, and so not every land grant is the same. And there are a lot more expertise that adapted to try to answer the issues that local and state stakeholders care about. Currently, I think it's still a very important benefit that we have if we are thinking about the investments for land-grant university in general, especially the investment and expenditures on extension system and personnel within the university and also at your district, your counties are declining significantly compared to what we had before. This is a concerning trend for me.
Yeah, I echo what Wendong said. And also like I think that like land grant based approach is actually one of the major strengths that we have, and I think we should keep up with that. Because when I look at like for instance South Korea, like we have just very uniform like government driven like farm education. There's no land grant university, but just I think government farmer school is the only thing that if plain people like try to learn like agriculture and try to do farming. So it is very limited, and that also kind of limits people like having good understanding of their locals and like what is a good actually options that they can choose. But in the US, because of this strong land grant university system, I think many people can easily access like very public, like open like sources that they can use. I think it's not just maybe nowadays information like knowledge provider, but also providing a platform that people can network and connecting each other. And especially in that context, extension is especially major, like I think, function that we are providing through the land grant university. And I think this is something I actually want to highlight as I think, very clear comparative advantage that we have, even compared to any other countries. So we have to keep it up.
You know, you just named a bunch of reasons why I love our work, and I feel fortunate to do what I do.
Once again, that was Kansas State University's Jenny Ifft, Cornell University's Wendong Zhang, and The Ohio State University's Seungki Lee. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. Governor Laura Kelly recently signed a bipartisan budget bill, which includes advancements in the K-State Dairy Teaching and Research Facility. It's aimed at replacing the current aging dairy facility with a modern, efficient unit capable of holding 425 to 430 head of cattle, utilizing both rotary and robotic milking technology. According to K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk, the new facility will include modern, cutting-edge technology for teaching, research, and extension, which he says is crucial for training the next generation of dairy scientists.
Today, I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers and actually our citizens here in the state of Kansas. Has some exciting news from our dairy department here at Kansas State University. You know, dairy has been part of our research and teaching program here at Kansas State University since 1875. That's when one of the first dairy research projects reported results. And our first dairy barn was constructed here at K-State in 1900. So for well over 150 years, Kansas State has been a leader in our dairy industry, not only here in the state of Kansas, but nationally and internationally as well. Our current dairy research facility was constructed in 1976 and 1977, and at the dedication of that facility in December of 1977, it was described as a state-of-the-art facility. Well, that was nearly 5 decades ago, and over the years it's been heavily used in our teaching and research programs, not only here in our Animal Sciences Department, but also by our College of Veterinary Medicine and other departments here at the university. The facilities are very old and tired, and we're pleased to announce that a couple of weeks ago there was a funding measure that was passed by the Kansas legislature and then signed into law by our governor to provide for funding for a new facility here at Kansas State University. It will be a 3-year project, and it is a partnership between the state of Kansas, Kansas State University, and our dairy industry. As we look at what it will cost, it'll be about a $45 million project, and it is a 3-year phase project, so each year there will be a partnership that provides $15 million. $5 million of that will come from the state of Kansas, $5 million from the university, and $5 million from the industry, and that will be a combination of donations as well as in cash as well as equipment. So as this phase project is completed, it will provide a new facility for our milking cows, milking facilities, as well as enhance our research capabilities at our dairy unit north of town. Be built on land that's currently part of the dairy unit, and it will include milking facilities that will feature both a robotic milking boxes that we use on smaller installations here in Kansas, as well as a small rotary deck that represents what we're doing on larger dairies across our state. As we look at what this means to Kansas State University, it will really provide us with the facilities needed to move our dairy program forward. As we look at our needs for teaching and research, as well as for worker development for the dairy industry, new facilities and modern technology are needed very badly. And this facility will provide for that and allow us to move into the next few decades as we continue to train students for work on dairy farms, as well as help with the training of our veterinarian students through the College of Veterinary Medicine. So we're excited to announce that this will be happening in the next 3 years. Again, it will be a 3-year process to reach completion, but we're very excited about the opportunity to work with this and build something that will serve our Kansas dairy industry for decades to come. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.